and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America. As we close out this season, we're shining a light on those who have sparked change through their work, revisiting conversations that remind us why our voices matter, to be the change our ancestors fought for, to speak out even when others try to silence us, and to never give up. I sat down with Frederick Joseph, philanthropist and New York Times best-selling author, to talk about his book, This Thing of Ours. We touched on some of his earlier work, where he opened up about the messages he hopes to share with both young and older men. And he also expressed why he thinks some of his books end up banned in places like prisons.
There are a lot of conversations about boys and men and what people are calling sort of this red pill manosphere of the internet, right? This idea of, I want a woman to be in the kitchen, and I want to, you have guys paying thousands of dollars to go do fake Navy SEAL training to try to be tougher and things of that nature. And it's all sort of rooted in, again, that identity crisis. Who am I as a person, right? What does it look like that I live in a country where all the men who are sort of amassing power are these sort of fake bravado having men? And if you are a young man struggling, if you're a boy struggling, and you're like, well, I want power, I want things for my family, is this the only way to get it? And so I think it's important that we show another way of getting to things, right? So it's one of the things I try to demonstrate on a regular basis, especially for boys and men. I love all my friends, like especially men, very much. Like I'm a hugger. Especially with my guys. I have a lot of friends. I think one of them actually he went to CUNY, and I think he's done CUNY TV before. Robert Jones Jr., author of The Prophets, which was a National Book Award finalist, and he's like my older brother, right? He's my big older brother. I hug and give him a kiss on the cheek every time I see him, and he's a black queer man, right? And I'm not, and that's fine. And I do that because I love him, but also because I want people to see that, right? I want people to see that affection and that love and that way of being a man that's not solely defined by, false toughness and bravado and this other sort of existential crisis that's happening on the other side.
Right, so we have a lot of work to do.
We do.
You find that you're succeeding and that it's receptive. I know that you dedicated your books to the kids and Yonkers and the young people at all, just to make sure that they know what you say is that I see you and you're loved and you can be who you are.
Right, exactly.
Well, the storyline in your novel is about banning books, banning certain writers. And we were, discussing apparently that book, Patriarchy Blues, was banned.
Yeah.
So talk to us about that and the effort that went into that, and how do we get around it? I'm a little concerned because the whole DEI, effort is working when you just wipe out, the presence of people in history. There's a problem there.
Absolutely. So this book, so Patriarchy Blues and my first book, The Black Friend, are both banned. Patriarchy Blues specifically is very interesting because The Black Friend is a YA book. That's my very first book, and that was banned in many schools around the country. Patriarchy Blues, though, was actually banned in prisons, largely in the South and in the Midwest. And so I think part of the strategies, I think when people are not understanding, is that bannings, not just of books, but of curriculum, of history, the erasure of individuals and conversations is by design, because you don't want the masses to become more liberated mentally, emotionally, physically, so on and so forth. So what does it look like if you have a book that's sort of helping men, especially in Patriarchy Blues, unpack the harm that not only they have caused, but the harm that they have faced, right? What does it look like to say, I don't need to be this man that is rooted in toxic masculinity? It means that you might have a bunch of people who actually have redemptive arcs who are incarcerated, which is what we claim to want as a society, but we actually don't want, right? Part of the prison industrial complex is we want to keep people incarcerated because people make money from people being incarcerated, right? It's an entire business to make sure that people are in prisons and in
don't
jails.
We know it, and now shipped to El Salvador, et cetera.
Exactly. And so what happens if they're reading books and things like that are actually freeing them in the mind, freeing them in the heart and in the spirit, and they actually do come out of being incarcerated and they don't come back, right? So it's so I think that's largely why these prisons have banned the book, because they strategically have said, yeah, we're not going to allow for anything that might actually get you free.
Sophia Victor is an artist who uses her talent to tell powerful stories, uplift communities, and inspire change through her work. She's painted portraits of formerly incarcerated individuals, including the exonerated 5 and members of the Black Panthers, to amplify their voices and honor their experiences.
It's an ongoing project until everybody comes home. 2010, I started to write letters to different individuals from the Black Panther movement who were politically incarcerated. That turned into me going to visit them. That turned into me working with their family members to raise money for their commissary, raise money for their legal defense, using my art as a fundraising tool. And I guess it got to a point like even the painting behind us with Dr. Matulu Shakur, who unfortunately passed away after he came home. When the Bronx Museum was open to me showing a piece and his piece was chosen, I was like, well, on the phone with him, like, what do you want to say? Your face might become in front of thousands of people. If you could speak to the audience, what would you say? And so in that installation, he wrote a letter specifically to people who are coming to the exhibit, talking about who he is, saying how they could support.
You were corresponding with some of those incarcerated and published them as a book, but it was written under your
yes.
single name.
Yes, correspondence. It was published before I got married under Sophia Dawson, and it has about 8 years of letters written to me from, 30 plus people. When the project started, there were about 44 people in. By God's grace, over 17 people have come home since that project started. And these are all people who on paper were supposed to serve life sentences, double life sentences. So it's pretty miraculous what has happened. And the book was really a tool to, again, help those who are coming home have some type of means of income, have an opportunity to do book tours and talks and things of that nature, so that way they could have some.
Right, and you did work with the exonerated 5 as well.
Yes. So in 2012, when the documentary, there's a documentary called The Central Park 5.
Right.
And so that came out. It was screening in Manhattan. I didn't know anything about their case. I'm born in '88. Their case happened in '89, and I honestly thought that I was going to see a film about a Panther case.
Right.
And a friend took me, and then the same thing happened, when I learned about people who were politically incarcerated. There's this unsettlement that happened when I walked out of that theater, and so immediately I was like, okay, what's going on now? My friend was like, well, they have court on Monday. Do you want to go? And I was like, yeah, I'll go. So I went to court with my son in his stroller, and at that point, their case got so popular that there was an overflow room. So we sat in the overflow, and after every court appointment, they would actually go down to Foley Square and do a level of demonstration, protest, and actually let people know hey, this is what happened in the courtroom today. This is how you can support. They had megaphones. So I introduced myself. I was like, hey, I'm an artist. I'd love to help you guys and support in any way I can, tell your story through my work. And they were like, okay. But then they didn't really know who I was. So Dr. Council member now, Yusuf Salam, gave me his number. Raymond Santana, who I think is also entering into politics now, and Corey Wise.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So you lifted their cases up, and
yes, I started their portraits. That was when Instagram was new and Facebook tagging was new.
Right.
So as I was working on it, people started tagging them, and then we decided to put together a pop-up exhibition. So there's a clothing store in Brooklyn that basically pushed all their racks to the back room, let me hang my work up.
A new gallery, so to speak.
Right.
That's great.
There were
I love it.
5 portraits. Dr. Yusuf came out, Raymond came out, the Innocence Project came out when they were still pretty new, with paper petitions for everybody that came to the exhibit to sign. We sold T-shirts. All the money that was raised from the paintings, the T-shirts,
Oh my goodness.
and the prints all went to support their legal defense.
That is
And then-
absolutely fantastic. Well,
And then the turnaround, Dr. Youssef, years later, purchased his painting and
He
flew
did.
me to Georgia to hang it into the house before he moved back to New York.
Right.
So he owns his portrait now.
Well, right. Well, and somebody else owns a portrait that you did from Do the Right Thing.
Yes.
Tell us about that, and then I want to talk about
Okay.
how you actually get these fantastic portraits.
Oh my goodness. So yes, so Spike Lee is one of my newest collectors, by the grace of God. It's a true honor. My dad was freaking out when I told him because he was like adamant about, making sure that we watched these films when we were kids. And
Right. And so you were a kid when you saw, I guess you must have been.
yeah, I was a kid when I saw a lot of his films, but then once I started getting into like activism, I rewatched a lot of things as well. And the way it happened, honestly, I went to my house, my husband and I were picking up paintings for another pop-up exhibition. There's like a smaller exhibition of my work up right now at the Langston Hughes Library in Queens, Corona,
Right.
Queens.
Right.
My parents have, a lot of paintings stored, and they rotate them. So when I went to pick up some other work, this painting was up on the wall, and I hadn't seen it in a while, and I was like, oh, wow. I was already posting every day for Black History Month, so I posted it, and I tagged him, and just forgot about it. And then, Spike commented on the piece, and then he started messaging me, asking me, like, inquiring about the painting. And so my husband's my studio manager. So once we shifted to that level of conversation, I introduced him to David, and the
And
rest
who
is
is
history.
your manager right now? I mean, so did Spike get a deal or?
Spike did get it.
Okay, all right, that. But
We wanted to honor him, so we did.
well, self-proclaimed troublemaker Luvvie Ajayi Jones is known for disrupting the status quo. While discussing her book, Little Troublemaker Defends Her Name, she also challenged our inactions in the Black community and the collective impact.
I think we find ourselves at a time, at a crossroads, that speaks to all the ways in which we've left power behind. This is not a moment that just happened randomly. This feels like a divine timing, divine lesson of not honoring truth, not holding ourselves accountable and each other accountable to each other, and all the ways in which we have thought being good means just standing out the way. Now we are seeing worst case scenarios happen. We're seeing actual lives on the line. And I think right now the question for all of us to think about is, what are we gonna do then? And will our inaction convict us? I actually think our inaction so far has actually convicted us. And by our, I mean the greater American population. I feel like Black Americans have done our part. But as a collective, I mean, we are in this moment where the systems are failing, where the empire is crumbling, and people are like, how did we get here? I think we left a lot behind. We left truth behind. We left courage behind. We left power behind. And then we left humanity behind too, like seeing each other in a real way. Social media has, of course, contributed to that, like ways in which we dehumanize each other every day. And I don't think we need to cower. I think now is the time when we need to find all that courage that we've been holding down and find the urgency of the time and just move.
Right. Well, you need to speak. More people need to hear you say that because more people are seriously afraid.
Yeah.
So, and the chips falling where they may be for so many people is that we know it's vengeance, retribution. So how do we, I think the answer is collectively resist that.
Yeah.
But it's real life. It's not some mystical, perhaps it may
Right.
happen.
Right. But I think about how we've, and by we again, Black Americans have always resisted and have kind of always lived under a fascist regime in this country. Because in spite of what was happening for everybody else, what was happening for Black people and indigenous people was oppression. So what everybody's recognizing now is that, oh, this is what it looks like. See, this is also why y'all are seeing black people doing boots on the ground. Not because we're not recognizing how important this moment is, but because our joy is a revolution. Like, to be able to find joy in the worst of humanity while there's suffering has been our specialty. That is how we've lived. That's how we've survived. So when they're like, I can't believe people are line dancing, and I'm like, trust, the people who are line dancing are also getting, after the line dance, organizing things in mutual aid. So they're not just randomly out here. And I think right now is when, you know, the majority group, which, again, that in itself is also, they called us minorities for a long time. We're not. But white people are going to have to step up. Honestly, it comes down to that.
Right.
So as you've seen the protest has been happening, I think black people need to sit back, because anytime we've showed up to protest, they have turned them into violent moves, not because of us, but because they see us and they see violence from nothing we've done. It's like I saw a protest the other day. I can't remember what city it was. There were like 3 black people there and they got arrested. And I'm just like,
Right.
really?
Really?
I think our work is different. I think this is a moment where our work is collective community, is where we need to go deeper into ourselves and mutual aid, where we do need to organize and be having the secret meetings and the underground meetings, but we don't necessarily have to put our bodies on the line right now. I think it is time for other people to do that. Yeah.
And especially for black women.
Oh my gosh, black women, you know what? I got to a point in all of this where I said, I think I'm actually understanding why Kamala didn't win. And for me, I'm seeing the divine reason for it. I think the divine reason is, I think the empire has been overdue to crumble. The American empire that has denigrated so many people, where only the 1% has been able to thrive, has been overdue for crumbling. They say the average empire lasts 250 years. America's 250th year is what, 2026? Imagine if Kamala was at the helm when it happened. They would blame a black woman for 400 years of dysfunction, put it on her back. Not just that, because we want to protect her, because we see she would represent us, we would also put this country on our back in a different way. It might have broken us. So I realize what is happening right now is actually above and beyond all of us. What we just need to do is double down on ourselves, on each other, on collective care, on soul care, on self-care, and black women especially, we need it. We're so overdue for it. It is time for us to put the capes down, take our deep breath, and say, okay, what is my priority? How can I put my mask on first? How can I protect the ones I love? And then be able to protect outside of those people. And I think that's what we need to do.
You know, I had not heard that before. As often we hear things from you first, you know, in terms of the scope of things. Speak to us about specific activities. I know you say collective, do it. You know, where do you see yourself putting your actions? I know you're writing.
Writing, yeah. I think one, I am definitely making sure I'm pouring more into my sisterhoods. So I'm checking in on my friends. How are you doing? Like, how's your spirit? Are you okay? 2, I think a lot of us who are in the positions to make more money need to make more money, and here's why. We might need to support more people. As the economy is crashing, as this recession that economists have been saying are gonna happen, we might actually have to take on more responsibility, paying somebody's mortgage, paying somebody's rent, making sure somebody else has food. So that's the practical piece of saving more money, asking people, what do you need? Do you need a job? And really making sure community is a verb is what I'm trying to double down on. And then tapping in on actions like Angela Rye, and she's doing a State of the People tour.
Right.
Helping those type of efforts too, and amplifying the people who are also doing the work that can actually have collective impact. So all of us need to like double down on what will you do in this moment. It doesn't mean you're gonna do everything, but the things that you will do, be intentional about it and do deep work. We need deep work now, not just everybody doing 55,000 things. Can you figure out 3 places, 3 ways that you can actually have real impact? Can you give somebody advice? Can you give somebody money? Can you give somebody time? Can you give them energy? Can you give them a job?
I asked Lurie Daniel Favors, lawyer, activist, and executive director of the Center for Law and Social Justice at CUNY's Medgar Evers College, how far we've come in the 40 years since the program at Medgar Evers first began, with police brutality being a major issue. Here's what she had to say.
Well, it depends on who you ask, because frankly, there have been significant improvements. We now have the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which is a much more vibrant body than it has ever been, and yet at the same time hampered by the current leadership changes and shuffling about. We have had some phenomenal lawsuits that have been filed on behalf of Black New Yorkers who saw the worst of NYPD policing. And of course, we always want to say we know that not all police are a part of that sort of policing, but unfortunately, because NYPD is an institution, its capacity to do harm often outstrips the capacity of individual officers' desire to do good. And so while we now have the ability to ensure that folks are getting adequate representation, the facts of the matter is that with stop and frisk, which is a form of policing that myself and many others who were far more invested did a lot of work in terms of organizing and activism and going into the courts and filing the lawsuits, and really did an effort, or had an effort, to reduce those numbers, because at their height you had over 500,000 New Yorkers who were being stopped, questioned, and frisked on an annual basis. Black men, the majority of them, 85% Black and Latino men. And while that number is, those statistics are horrifying enough, what we often don't do is break down what that meant, because even though 70 to 80% of the folks who were being stopped, questioned, and frisked were Black and brown New Yorkers, 9 out of 10 of them were being dismissed from those encounters with NYPD with no desk appearance ticket, no summons, no sort of subsequent involvement whatsoever, which means that when they were being stopped, questioned, and frisked, they were literally being stopped for the crime of walking around in melanated skin. And that is terrorism, because if this were happening to white New Yorkers, where they were being stopped on a regular basis to the tune of more than 500,000 stops a year, we would recognize that rightfully as an act of terrorism, and we would respond in kind. But because it was happening to Black and brown New Yorkers, it was considered policing a norm. And so we did a lot of work to support the efforts of activists who were fighting those cases, and won. They won on a significant number of levels. And unfortunately, we are now under a new leadership, which has brought those practices back, has brought back some of the groups that activists fought so hard to have eradicated from the NYPD, like the Strategic Response Group, these groups that operate, some have said, more like gangs than actual officers. And while we were excited to see that the organizing work was able to have some of those units eliminated, we are now seeing the return, and not even that, it's also the return of that practice of stop, question, and frisk, which has been very troublesome.
And voting is also, we'll talk more about the police, New York City police, in a minute, but voting was also a primary focus. And
this is huge. And one of the reasons why voting rights for our community is so important is because if you think about it, from 1619 until right around 1964, when the Civil Rights Act is passed, we could be killed for trying to have a conversation about engaging meaningfully in politics, trying to engage civically. And yes, we had that brief decade or so of Reconstruction, but even that was fraught, that period after the Civil War, even that was fraught with political violence. And so that's roughly 46-ish or so years where Black community members were not able to gain the experiential knowledge that we need to understand how this system works. Now, that in and of itself is troubling, but as a comparison point, our white colleagues during that entire 346-year period were asking the tough questions. What does it mean to have a candidate that represents you? How do you fundraise? How do you create committees? What is a club? What does a political club look like? How do we hold someone accountable once we've got them into office? They were building the plane as they flew it, but they had a bird's eye view as to how this system works and what the vote meant to allow that system to function well. We did not have that. And when you don't account for that gap in our civic education and our voting rights, get out the vote work, then you're missing a key component. And so our voter education work really looks at filling in that gap and ensuring that our community doesn't just register to vote, but has the information necessary to meaningfully engage with the ballot.
And the whole redistricting, figuring that out, being carved out crazily of your right to power, actually, which is what it means.
Yes, and for us, redistricting is so important. This is one of the reasons why we are always so grateful to partner with organizations like Latino Justice, Pearl Deaf, and the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, because we recognize that, one, redistricting is a word that frankly does not inspire a whole lot of excitement. It's a boring topic, but it's one of the most important topics that keeps our democracy together. When I group you together or spread you apart based on your electoral power, and for just, if you don't mind, if I just want to, for people who don't know what redistricting is, it's essentially this process that takes place every 10 years after the census. The census is that survey that we all fill out in a year ending in 0, so 2010, 2020, we'll do another one in 2030, that gives the government a snapshot as to who we are, where we live, and how many of us there are in those spaces. And that's important because the resources that our communities need for schools, for libraries, for healthcare, for housing, for jobs, all of that is informed by and funded based on formulas that incorporate those census numbers. Unfortunately, a lot of us don't fill out the census as we should. We can talk about that in a bit. But
now Lurie is telling you why you need to fill that form out. You have a few years to get ready.
You do, and yet you don't. So I want all the pastors and faith leaders out there, I want all the community organizations to begin talking about census. And I'll give you a simple example as to why it matters. Let's imagine we live in a community of 100 people, 100 families. Let's make it even easier. 100 families, and let's call it Blacklandia. And in Blacklandia, this community of 100 families, all of us have one child in our family, which means there are 100 kids in this community. And let's say, according to the census formulas, if communities of our size fill out the census, the government will know there's 100 families, there's 100 children. Each of those families is going to get $1 for education for the following year. If all 100 of us fill out the census, then we will be fully funded with our educational needs. However, if only 30% of us in Blacklandia fill out the census, then according to the government, for the purposes of funding our education, there's only 30 kids here. They're going to give us $30. And what happens is in September, all 100 families send all 100 beautiful children to the school, and the school is going to educate them, but it's going to educate 100 children on a budget that's only appropriate for 30.
I love your explanation.
Thank you. I try really hard to make it salient to people.
That is absolutely it, in its essence. So when the census comes back around, I hope you remember the importance of filling it out. That's it for us at this time. I want to thank my guests, artist Sophia Victor, author Frederick Joseph, professional troublemaker Luvvie Ajayi Jones, and Medgar Evers, executive director of the Center for Law and Social Justice, Lurie Daniel Favors. And thanks to you for joining us for another great season. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America. We will see you the next time.